Welcome to this presentation. Tonight we're going to be talking about how you can support youth on the spectrum at home. And really, this is going to be kind of like a basics introduction to applied behavior analysis, which, as many of you probably know, is kind of one of the top treatments for supporting youth on the spectrum. Specifically, what I thought might be helpful to talk about with you is first trying to figure out why your child might be behaving in a certain way, what the triggers are for those behaviors, and then maybe also what might be happening in the home that's kind of maintaining the behavior or keeping it going, right? We're also going to talk in kind of the second half about how to prevent behaviors, reinforce appropriate behaviors, and also teach new replacement behaviors. Because we can never kind of like make one behavior go away without teaching kids a different way of getting those same needs met. And so that really helps us to frame this discussion today. When we think about like why a kid might be acting in a certain way, it's to get a need met, right? And usually their behavior, whether we like it or not, right, is usually effective at trying to get those needs met. So if we don't like the behavior they're using to get needs met, then we need to teach them a different way to meet those same needs. So some of the things that we think lead to behavior, right? Some of the reasons that we might all engage in behavior is to get attention from someone, right? Maybe we need some connection, or maybe it's to try to get a reaction. I know I did this a lot with my siblings, right? It might be to try to get items that I want, like my favorite snack or my iPad. It might be to try to get access to certain activities. So maybe I really, really enjoy the water running over me when I take a bath, right? There might be a sensory component, or another way we call this in behavior analysis is automatic reinforcement. So, I might pick my nails because there's something about that is reinforcing for me, right? It gets out some anxiety for me. Um, Similarly, kids might stim because they're needing more sensory stimulation or reinforcement. On the other end of things, we can also engage in behaviors to get out of doing stuff, right? Like if someone's asking me to do work that's really hard or overwhelming for me, I might behave in a certain way to try to get out of doing that. If I'm experiencing a sensory overload, I might engage in behaviors to get out of that sensory, experience. Sometimes difficult transitions. So if I'm going from something I really enjoy, and now I know that it's something I don't enjoy, like going to bed or having to clean up my toys after playing, I might try to get out of that transition. Certain social situations might be uncomfortable. We might try to get out of those. I'm sure we can think of times as adults that we engage in avoidance behavior for social situations. And then finally, that sensory simulation again, trying to maybe avoid certain sensory simulations, like hearing the happy birthday song. So as we, think about why your child's behaving in a certain way, just kind of keep these things in mind. Like what is my hypothesis? What are they needing that the behavior is kind of serving to get? So an easy way to remember this, we sometimes use the acronym Everybody Eats, which is everybody is either trying to escape something, they're maybe trying to get attention or connection socially. Maybe they're trying to access something tangible, like, again, snacks, favorite toys, favorite movies, or something sensory, right? So the way that we try to determine the function of a behavior is to observe the ABCs. And what we mean by the ABCs are looking at the behavior and seeing what happens before it, which is the antecedent, and then also what happens right after it, which we call the consequence, but it doesn't necessarily have to be good or bad. So, to kind of break this down, antecedents are things that happen before the behavior. We might think of these as like triggers. So, anytime that I'm really hungry, maybe I start to get hangry and tantrum, right? And the consequence for that is anything that happens after it. So, maybe the consequence is every time I'm hangry, my mom gets me a snack, right? Or every time I'm hangry and I kind of start to throw a tantrum, um, my teacher tells me to go in the corner. That could be a consequence as well, right? So it's just anything that's happening before is the antecedent, anything that's happening after is the consequence. And what you'd want to do if you're not sure about your hypothesis for function is start to track these for a while and really try to understand, all right, what are my triggers here and what are they getting out of it? What happens afterwards? So we'll talk through some examples here. Antecedents, common triggers here, common antecedents that we see at home can be routines and rituals. So maybe as soon as your kid wakes up, they know the next step is that they're going to have to brush their teeth and they hate that, right? Maybe that's a trigger. Or maybe the transition. So you start to give them the cue, like, I'm going to count down 3, 2, 1. Now your iPad goes away, right? Hearing that 3, knowing that that transition's coming, that could be a trigger. The presentation of work. So just seeing that pencil and worksheet come out could be a potential trigger. Sometimes our demeanor as parents, right? We come home, we're super cranky, or maybe you come in the room with a certain, I know that I had the teacher face, right? Like the stink eye. And that can be a trigger for behavior. Sometimes parent proximity or even the lack of proximity. So let's say you move and you go to the other room, and that's a trigger for like, now I can finally go get into the fridge and grab my favorite snack. Sibling behavior. So I know I was an older sibling. I actually have a sister on the spectrum, right? And we definitely found ways to get reactions from one another. So is a sibling potentially doing something that could be serving as a trigger for behavior? Or just anybody else, right? Maybe somebody in the store gets too close and that kind of sensory overload is a trigger. So these are some things to watch out for. And then in terms of common consequences that maintain behavior, attention. So I know, a lot of my examples are from the classroom, from being a former teacher, that there would be times where, kids would, engage in a certain behavior in the classroom. And then I would come over with kind of the stink eye and say, we don't, use pencils on the desk, we use pencils on the paper. And for some reason, it seemed like the more I did that, the more that the kid would write on the desk, right? Well, it's possible that what they were really looking for was not like writing on the desk, right? They just wanted my attention. And I was giving it to them, right? But I just need to find a way to teach them to get that attention more appropriately. Similarly, maybe it's sibling attention, whether it's positive or negative, right? They could be getting poked at or teased, or maybe it's really nice, lovely sibling attention that they're after. Praise could be a consequence. So maybe, my child makes it through the toothbrushing routine in the evening, the teeth brushing routine, and I say, I'm so proud of you for brushing your teeth all on your own. You did a great job doing that without my help. On the flip side of that, a reprimand could be a consequence, right? So you played with the toothpaste. I don't like that. You're going to need to go to your room, or you're going to need to clean up that toothpaste. Timeout could be potentially a consequence. Sometimes escaping from a task. I see this a lot in the classroom where kids will, crumple up a paper or throw it across the room. And the teacher tends to kind of the disruptive behavior. And while they're kind of caught up in attending to that disruptive behavior and having the student clean it up and all of this other stuff, maybe giving a consequence, in the meantime, the student has eaten up a bunch of time, right? And that's time that they should have been working. So it's a pretty effective escape for them. If I crumple up my paper, I distract my teacher from making me work. for potentially 10, 15 minutes. So sometimes these things can be sneaky. We have to pay attention really close to these ABCs to find out what is really the need that kids are after. And then the last thing could be planned ignoring. So maybe, we're at the checkout line and Johnny asks for M&Ms and he starts begging and kicking and maybe even swiping at things at the checkout. And once I've said, no M&Ms today, maybe next time, then I just engage in ignoring of any junk behavior after that, right? Because I want to teach him that that's not an appropriate way to earn M&Ms. So hopefully you've kind of got the hang of these ABCs. Again, there's no good or bad. It's just whatever happens before and after. And we track those over time to try to find patterns and figure out what's going on with the behavior, right? What is really the function? We're going to talk now about preventing problem behaviors. And this might be when you pay attention to all of those antecedents or triggers. So if you find common triggers that seem to just be a problem for you over and over and over, then maybe what we want to do is work on those triggers to try to prevent the behavior from happening in the first place. So a couple of things. This one might seem really intuitive, and I see lots of families say oh yeah, we're already doing that. We've got rules established. But then when I ask kids, often they can't articulate what the rules of the house are. So even just having really clear rules at home for how we behave and how we interact with one another can be a really helpful prevention, because you can just keep returning to those, right? You want to make sure that they're clearly established, maybe select 3 to 4, so it should be enough that your kids can remember and recite back. And you want to frame them positively, so you want to tell them what they should be doing. So an example would be, instead of saying no kicking or hitting, we might say instead that we need to keep hands, feet, and objects to ourselves in the home, right? That's a way to frame that positively. The other thing about this is that, just having it up on your fridge might not be enough for your kid, right? They might need pictures to go with those words to make sure they understand it. And they need you to revisit it often to make sure they've really got the hang of it. So that's first step. The next step is the way that we give directions. And again, this is something that was tough for me as a teacher to give effective directions. And I see a lot of parents struggling with this as well. So the biggest thing that I see is oftentimes we give directions to kids when we really don't have their attention. And then we start to get really frustrated because we have to repeat ourselves, sometimes even several times, until we finally get their attention, right? One of the things that can happen with that, especially if you're raising your voice, is that the kid kind of learns that I don't have to really pay attention to mom or dad's voice or grandma's voice, right? Until she starts getting really loud and her eyeballs start bulging out of her head, right? So you really want to try to make sure that you get the child's attention first. You want to try to limit directions to only the ones that you really need and that you're going to follow up with. So if you give a direction, but you don't care so much if they do it or not, it's probably better to just do it yourself, especially if it could potentially lead to kind of a battle of the wills with getting that work done, right? So really being judicious, thinking about your own partner, right? Or a good friend. If you just spent all day giving them directions, they're probably not going to want to hang around you very long. So we really want to be kind of careful about how many directions we're giving in a day. You want to be direct, so don't ask questions like, would you like to put your shoes on now, right? Just tell them it's time to put your shoes on. Be really specific about it. Keep it developmentally appropriate. So, I've seen, with really young children especially, sometimes they can't handle more than 1 or possibly 2 directions at a time. They just can't hold all of that in their memory. So keeping that in mind as well. You might need to break down a task and just tell them 1 direction at a time. And then finally, these last 2 are I think, kind of key. As I mentioned, you want to give this in kind of a neutral tone of voice because you don't want your kid to learn that the only time they have to pay attention to you is when you're yelling. And then the last thing is if you're going to provide a rationale for the directions, it's better to do it ahead of time, right? So, an example of that would be we're getting ready to go pick up your dad at the airport, so I need you to put your shoes on. Okay? The reason that you wouldn't want to say, like, I need you to put your shoes on. And then let's say Susie says, well, but why do I have to put my shoes on? And you say, because I need you to put them on right now because we're getting ready to leave the house. But why? Well, what ends up happening is there's this big delay that gets built in, and somehow the shoes aren't being put on, right? So then you have to repeat the direction again. So it's better to just give the rationale ahead of time, and then there's nothing else to do but follow the direction, right? And there's no question in your mind that your child understands. They just need to follow the direction now. Sometimes for kids who maybe are still learning in terms of understanding language, we might need to give these directions using visual supports, and I'll share some of that a little later in the direction. So if you do these things, then you know that your child has all of the ingredients to comply with you, right? And then if they're not complying with you after that, they're kind of choosing not to do that. And then we need to follow through with some ways of helping them to finish the directions, right? To complete whatever the task is that you've asked them to do. So a couple of other tips here. Like I said, you want to avoid multiple directions. You want to avoid any vague directions. So saying something like be careful isn't really clear. It's better to just say, don't put your hand on the stove because it's hot right now, right? Questions are really tough because if you say, do you want to put your shoes on right now? And the kid's like, nope, then what do you do, right? Or let's clean up the toys. Unless you mean that you're planning to help your child with cleaning up the toys, then it's not really let's, right? They need to clean up their toys. And then finally, that whole direction followed by a reason. We talked about that. It often just distracts from the direction that you gave. All right. And again, just a reminder here, we want to frame it positively. So we want to tell our children what we want them to do, not what they shouldn't be doing. And a good example of that is like if I were bouncing a ball in the house and you said, don't bounce that ball, right? Maybe I start throwing the ball in the house instead, right? And you're like, don't throw the ball. And then maybe instead I start kicking the ball. So it's better to just tell me, hold the ball, or ball goes outside, right? Tell me what you need me to do, not what I shouldn't be doing. So instead of don't run, we might say walking feet. Instead of don't scream, we might use indoor voices or quiet voices, something like that. So there are just a few examples here. All right. One other thing I think that's worth talking about here is blocking behavior. So if you anticipate that your child might engage in something like self-injury or aggression, potentially even running or eloping, throwing items, if you know that they're intentionally going to choose incorrect items, right? Or maybe destroying things in the house, the best thing you can do is anticipate that and try to block that behavior from happening. I know lots of parents have probably instituted safety procedures at home for eloping, like locks that are very high up on the doors and windows, right? Those are preventions. That's a way that you block behavior. And we want to try to do that as much as possible with these really high intensity types of behaviors. And we'll, again, start talking later about how we can replace those behaviors. But again, this is kind of an obvious one, but it's just one thing to really keep in mind, and it's worth mentioning. Okay, this is another really big one that I think is very important and kind of underutilized. Lots of kids, especially I think kids who have limited communication skills, struggle with feeling control over their environments. And I'm sure that any of you can think about situations at work where you have a lack of control over what you do and how frustrating it is to live in that type of environment. And often I see, kids where they're really provided very little choices about their day, right? So I think that offering choices as much as you can really be helpful in gaining some what we call behavioral momentum. I think this is especially good for kids who have that escape function, right? They're avoiding something. They don't want to do it. It helps to kind of share control with them. So you're allowing them the choices. What's nice about that is you can control the choices. So in the case of like food, for example, um, you know, maybe the kid wants a cupcake and you can say like, well, we're not doing cupcakes right now, but you can have chicken nuggets or you can have, a cheeseburger. So you get to control the options available to the child, but the child gets to control their choice of which of those things they pick, right? It also helps to enhance kind of their buy-in, their motivation, and also even their responsibility for those actions. So if I pick a cheeseburger, I'm probably going to be a lot more invested in eating it than if a cheeseburger is just handed to me, right? Um, this can also help to increase their independence as well, which I know is something that a lot of parents probably are really like craving right now during these pandemic times. The last thing is that you could potentially use this with reinforcers as well, in addition to demands, right? So you could have them choose like the order of tasks. So if they have homework to do, right, maybe they get to pick between starting with science or math. So that's an example of offering choices for demands, but you can also offer choices for reinforcers as well. And this is a way that we do this with visual support. So again, if your child has kind of limited communication ability, they might not be able to like take in all of the choices you're verbally offering to them. But sometimes offering those in picture format can be really helpful. So like what song do you want to sing or what do you want to play on the playground today, right? We have the 3 choices available or the 6 choices available and they pick the one that they want. Behavioral momentum, this is another one that's really good for an escape function. So here what we're doing is we're picking some little tasks first that we know the child's going to be highly successful with. We're going to present them really quickly and maybe give some praise along the way. And then we're going to slowly work our way up to things that are more challenging. So an example of that might be, do some jumping jacks, tap your nose, sit in your chair, pick up your pencil, write your name, right? And the whole time you're going to be like saying it fast and praising the child. And then the next part is write number 1. And then you have them write the math problem, right? So you're kind of sliding into the work as opposed to just slamming them with the work. It's just one example. Another strategy that we use a lot when it comes to um, preventing behavior is called the Primact Principle. We also call this Grandma's Rule. So the idea is first you eat your vegetables, then you can have your dessert, right? First you do the non-preferred task or thing, then you get the thing that you really want, right? The more preferred activity. And an example of that is seen here in visual format. So first put the toys away, then you get to play the bubbles. And you can see here that, we might have a menu of different pictures that we pull in and out. This can be helpful for routines and transitions as well. So like first we have to go to the grocery store, then we get to go to the library and pick up books for you. Something like that. This can be used for chores. First we tidy up, then you get to play outside. First work time, then we get to pack up and go home. You can see a classroom example here. Sometimes if your kid is a little more sophisticated, we might use a first, next, then. So lots of examples. And we've already gotten into, visual supports a little bit as preventions, but visual schedules can also be really helpful for just kind of kids who are triggered by not knowing what's coming next or deviations to routine. So having a visual schedule where they can kind of predict what's going to be happening in their day, what their routines are, can help to kind of cut down on some anxiety, help them kind of know what the expectations are for the day. And there are just kind of a couple examples of that here. Other visual supports, you can see that there's a little visual here to help maybe organize bins of toys, some visual feet here to show spacing in a line. You can see that was pre-pandemic. Some visual supports for where items need to go on their placemat at the table. All right, our last big prevention here is what's called a task analysis. And so a task analysis breaks down something that might be a complex task into smaller, more easily taught little tiny skills, right? And we often develop these just by like practicing it ourselves or observing the task. So you can see the example of washing hands here in visual format. I'll show you a couple of other ones. This first one on the top left is for tying shoes, believe it or not. You can see the one on the right is for brushing teeth, and then the one here towards the bottom left is for dressing myself. So these things can be really helpful for getting kids through routines that are maybe complex or have multiple steps. Some kids need more of these, visuals and more stuff broken down than others. So it really depends on where your kid is, but that could be a very helpful prevention as well. Okay, and then we're going to get into reinforcement. And what we mean by reinforcement is anything that strengthens a behavior. So maybe we have some problem behaviors we're trying to prevent, but we also need to try to strengthen other behaviors so that we don't need, the child doesn't need the problem behaviors to get their needs met anymore. And reinforcement could be praising them. It could be providing them with a break when they ask appropriately. So instead of tantruming, they ask for a break and we immediately give it to them, right? Because they asked for it appropriately. Giving them a treat, maybe it's giving them a preferred activity or giving them something sensory that they like back scratches, something like that. All of those can be examples of reinforcement. In the business, we often call non-contingent reinforcement or recommend non-contingent reinforcement. And this is really just kind of simply offering praise as often as we can, and not just praise, but it can be other things as well. And it doesn't even have to depend on behavior. So maybe it's the absence of a behavior even, right? Like we're just going to be praising the child when we catch them doing something we really like. We want to, give it frequently. And I keep using praise because I think that's a common one, but sometimes it's just offering breaks. So maybe they're just, sitting, working really nicely and you say, hey, would you like a break? You've been working nicely. I appreciate that you're working. This is a way that we can help to kind of block or prevent some behaviors as well. And then I'm going to get into differential reinforcement procedures. And I'm not going to talk too much about the lingo, but basically what we mean by this is that we're going to be reinforcing one behavior, typically the behavior we want to see a lot of, and then we're going to be kind of withholding reinforcement, not giving a lot of attention as one example, for something that we don't like. So an example would be when a child uses a big boy voice, we provide lots of praise. If they're requesting something, we give it to them right away. And when they're using kind of like a whiny voice, then we might not provide a lot of attention to that. And that's not going to be the thing that gets their needs met. So over time, by seeing this contrast in the environment, the child starts to realize like, oh, when I use my big boy voice, I get a lot more praise. I get the things I want. When I whine, it's not so effective. It doesn't work anymore, right? So the first example of that is differential attention. And what we see And we actually see this in marriages, we see this in lots of different social situations, right? Is that every time we give a correction or we give feedback or we maybe reprimand the child, we have to balance that out in the environment with 3 to 5 positive interactions, or often we call this labeled praise. And again, think about this in your own relationship. So, what we mean by labeled praise is that it's instructional and it's reinforcing appropriate behavior. Some examples of that would be saying, "Good job using your indoor voice." So it's instructional. It's telling you, "I want you to use your indoor voice. That was really great when you did that. Nice work sharing your toys." So you can see it's very specific. It's behavior specific praise. And a lot of times, again, I see teachers and parents, they're saying things like "nice work" or "good job," which is good, it's helpful, but it doesn't really tell the child what they're getting praise for. So we want to be really specific. As I mentioned, it's really critical that we have this contrast in the environment. So if you're praising them, but then in the next breath, you're correcting them or reprimanding them, it kind of washes out the effect of the praise. And so what we want to start doing is just kind of ignoring the junk behavior. If it's not that important for us to respond to, and in particular for me, if it's not like maybe aggressive or going to destroy property or something like that, I'm going to do my best to just kind of ignore that and let it go. Because if I respond to it, if I give feedback to it, then I've got to balance it out with these 5 praises, right? Which is a lot. So really trying to use plan ignoring. And the big things for this are, when kids are trying to get attention in ways that maybe make us a little crazy, or just we wouldn't want them to do in certain settings, like maybe at school or out in public in the grocery store. So whining, throwing tantrums, those kinds of things, I'm going to really do my best to try to not give much attention to that at all, Obviously keeping the child safe, but really trying to do my best to not provide a lot of corrections to that or a lot of attention. And when I say ignoring, we have to even be careful, because sometimes we think we're ignoring, but our face is like, the veins are popping out and the kid's like, "Oh yeah, it's working." And I don't think it's that sinister, but they can see that they're getting a reaction, right? So you want to try to just look really neutral, try to stay calm. You typically don't want to talk to them during this time, so you wouldn't say something like, "I'm ignoring you right now until you're behaving appropriate." You're just going to stay neutral and wait for them to kind of chill out and start showing the appropriate behavior. And as soon as they do, right, as soon as they show that they're like back on board with engaging in appropriate behavior, it's like a light switch goes off and I'm like, "Oh, thanks so much for using your big boy voice. I love that," right? A couple of other things to keep an eye on. Often we start to see this behavior pop up a lot when the praise or the behavior specific praise isn't rich enough in the environment. And some kids are hummers, right? And like it feels like you've given them tons of praise, but they have a big gas tank. And so they just need more praise to kind of keep on track with their behavior and keep behaving appropriately. So keeping that in mind. Sometimes we accidentally reinforce behaviors too. So, that kid with the M&M example, I see, there is pressure, right? As a parent, when you're in that checkout and your kid starts swiping things and you're starting to feel embarrassed, it's really hard to not just give in and be like, "Oh, forget it, just take the M&Ms," right? But when we do that, what we're teaching is that you've got to really tantrum and flip out in order to get your M&Ms, right? And so next time they might up the ante on you. So really being careful when you're kind of doing this ignoring, that you just stick with it, you try to stay calm, you try to monitor your own anxiety, right? And tell yourself you're going to get through this. Usually tantrums hopefully aren't lasting more than maybe 20, 30 minutes. If it's more than that, you might want to seek help from a behavior analyst so you can get through this, right? But stick with the ignoring. And then finally, you want to really wait until the child has de-escalated and has started to regulate themselves a little bit better before you go back and address the behavior. Especially if it's something where like they escaped doing a demand like cleaning up or something like that. You don't want to just ignore that and forget about it. You want to revisit it and make sure that they do the cleanup, because we don't want to teach them that tantruming and freaking out means not cleaning up, but you have to wait until they're de-escalated. And then the last part is just consistency. So I'm sure we've all had that experience where maybe you're sticking with this awesome behavioral program, and then the favorite aunt comes into town or grandma comes into town and like kind of spoils the plan, right? And that can create big issues and setbacks. So you really want to make sure everybody's on the same page with this program. Okay, another thing we might do is we might try to teach an incompatible behavior and start reinforcing that. So an example is this. If you have a child that's getting out of their seats a lot in the classroom, one of the things that we might try to really reinforce is sitting in a chair. Anytime they're sitting in a chair, we're like, great job sitting down. I love that you're sitting down at the table for dinner. This is wonderful, right? So sitting in a chair is incompatible with walking around the room. Can't do both at the same time. To, maybe work on thumb sucking, writing might be, a replacement or an incompatible behavior for that. I'm sure you can think of other things too, like maybe putting together a puzzle, something with the hands that would be incompatible with thumb sucking. So we'd really praise up anytime the child is writing or putting together a puzzle. Differential reinforcement of an alternative behavior. This is where we pick something that's maybe kind of similar to what the child's doing to get their needs met. So let's say that your child is climbing the counter and reaching for a cookie. What we might do is teach them maybe the sign for cookie, or teach them to say cookie when they want a cookie. And to be honest with you, I might give a couple bites of a cookie every single time they do it, just because I really don't want them climbing on the counter. But I will give a little piece of cookie every single time they ask appropriately, to teach them that climbing's not going to work. I'm going to block you from doing that. But when you ask appropriately for a cookie, then you get that, right? And again, this probably feels really straightforward, but hopefully it's kind of lighting some light bulbs for things that maybe are happening in your life. This is a really common one, I feel like. So the kids who are interrupters, especially for all of you who are probably on Zoom calls all day now, right? And you have, it seems like anytime you're in like the most important meeting ever, right? That's when they interrupt you. So one of the things we might teach here is waiting. So when you're waiting nicely, if you can wait for 5 minutes, right? If you can make it until the timer goes off, that 5-minute timer, then I am going to give you like a Disney World dance party. And honestly, the best thing is to practice this before you get on your like very important Zoom call. So you could even have like a fake phone call set up with your friends where you're going to talk for 5 minutes on the phone. You could even pretend that somebody called, right? And as long as that phone is there, maybe you set a timer for 5 minutes, a visual timer, and say, if you can make it until the timer goes off, then you get a cookie or whatever it is, right? That's another strategy we use. So reinforcing a different behavior, in this case, waiting instead of interrupting. And then finally, there are some behaviors we won't want to have go away completely. So I'll give you an example. I had a student who, anytime independent seat work came up, they magically had to go to the bathroom like 10 times during that 10-minute period. And so what we kind of quickly realized is that this was an escape behavior. That was the function of that behavior. He was really struggling with the work, and so one of the things we had to do was both try to lower the rates of going to the bathroom, but also help him with the assignment. It was a clear indicator to me, right, that he was struggling. So the first part of that, the way that we lowered his bathroom use is we gave him a bathroom pass and said, you have 6 opportunities to go to the bathroom in the day. If you don't use all of those, then whatever's left, I'll give you 5 minutes on the computer for each, extra time that you didn't use, right? So we started with that, started helping him with his independent seat work so that he didn't have to do this escape behavior, right, to get those needs met. All right, and then the last part of this is the teaching better behaviors. We've already started to get into it a little bit, talking about it a bit. But just some other things, some other tricks for you. First, teaching to request for a break. I think, again, this is something that we just don't do very often, maybe because as teachers or as parents, like we're super scheduled out during the day and it just feels like there isn't time for a break. But what ends up happening is that kids tantrum or they engage in problem behavior and they naturally get their break one way or another, right? Whether we think there's time for one or not. Unfortunately, sometimes it disrupts the whole class or it disrupts the whole household. So it's better to just teach them how to appropriately ask for breaks from things. So if they need a break from cleaning, or if they need a break from dinner, or if they need a break from, a routine or homework, teaching them to just say appropriately, right? I need a break, or handing you a picture that says break please, like we've got on the screen. And at first, I'm going to immediately reinforce and give them a break the minute that they ask that, right? Just to teach them that I want them doing that instead of throwing a tantrum. And slowly you can start to fade it out and say like, okay, well, 3 more minutes and then you can have your break. But at first, you're just going to want to teach. Anytime you ask for a break, I'm going to give it to you, right? Because I would so much rather have you do that than the problem behavior. So teaching, requesting for breaks, I think is really critical. And to be honest with you, parents, I think kids are just as impacted by this pandemic as we are. I know my brain is operating at 25% productivity. I would imagine it's the same for kids as well. It's overload to have your schedules change, to have, not only your schedules maybe change, but then on top of that, you have all these new routines with masks and hand washing. So really being sensitive to the fact that kids probably need more breaks than they've ever needed. Social stories. Hopefully you guys have heard of these before, but this is one way to teach new behaviors to kids, especially kids who maybe, again, kind of have more limited language skills. What's also nice about this is you don't have to keep going over it verbally over and over. You've got a nice story that you can just refer back to and read the story. So there are a few components to a social story. Typically, you start with a descriptive couple of sentences that maybe describe the situation. So if it's the library or if it's the dentist, right? Where is it? Who all is going to be there and involved in that situation? What are they doing? Why are they doing it? Those might be some descriptive sentences we consider. We also, with social stories, will often have a perspective sentence. So this helps to kind of give the child some insight into the emotions or thoughts that other people might be having in a situation. The directive sentence is going to tell them the replacement behavior, what they should be doing, instead of whatever behavior it is we're trying to reduce or change. And then the last part might be a sentence that your child writes that says, now I know I don't have to do this, I can do this instead. And I'll show you an example here. And you can see this is made in PowerPoint. This was actually made by some friends in St. Johns County a long time ago. They were using this in a classroom. So this child was getting angry at school, and when they got angry, they would spit and do some other inappropriate behaviors. And so they were teaching her a replacement behavior for that. So when I'm angry in school, you can see we are setting the stage here. I like to come to school. This is what my school looks like. This is where I do my schoolwork. And every day I try my best. What's cool with PowerPoint is you can do fancy little things like that. When I try my best, I feel happy. So here's some perspective, right? Trying my best means that I'm going to have a good day. I'm going to feel good. There are some days that I feel angry or sad, but there are also some days I feel happy or glad. My teacher, and you can see we've got a nice sound effect here. My teacher feels happy when I try my best, and my teacher feels happy when I work quietly. So here's the kind of like replacement, right? When I get angry, I know I cannot spit. So now that's no longer going to work. And that's how my teacher maybe feels when I spit. But instead, when I get angry, I know I can tell my teacher that I feel mad. And my teacher is going to say, "Good job telling me that you feel mad. Thanks for letting me know you're frustrated," right? And then I can take a break. I can go take a break in my little break corner, maybe. When I get angry, I can go and sit quietly. And just kind of some reminders here that I don't want to spit because I'm going to hurt other people's feelings. But I don't have to spit in school anymore, right? Because now I can tell my teacher I'm frustrated and go take a break. And that makes everybody happy, especially me. So just a fun little example. I mean, these are things that you can make at home. There are also a ton of these now out on the interwebs. There are video examples on YouTube, so feel free to kind of poke around if you need something. Hopefully you don't have to reinvent the wheel. The last strategy I'm going to share with you tonight is something called the token economy. And as a psychologist, as a behavior analyst, I have a ton of families that are using the systems in the home, especially when kids are not naturally motivated to do things, or in times like the pandemic where maybe, your kid is typically motivated to do things, but they're just tapped out with pandemic fatigue. So a token economy is a behavior system of sorts, and what we want to do is set up some target behaviors. So for some of my families, it's like getting chores done. It might be saying I'm frustrated instead of throwing a tantrum, right? Could be one. It might be, using an indoor voice could be one that we're going to set up as a target behavior. I'm trying to think of others. Getting homework done, before the timer goes off, right? Something like that might be one. So you have this list of target behaviors for your child, and then you determine how many tokens or points each behavior is going to earn. And then you're going to have a list of backup reinforcers. So like when I get my 5 tokens, what am I going to get to earn with that? Maybe special privileges. Maybe I get to like pick the movie that night. Maybe I pick the family dessert. Maybe I get to put on a comedy show for my family. Maybe it's iPad time, right? Whatever is like the most motivating for your kid. And then you're going to kind of decide like how many of these points total is it going to take for them to earn that thing, right? And then when are you going to do the exchange? Is it going to be at the end of the night? Is it going to be right after dinner? And you want to kind of test the system out. So let me give you some visual examples of what that looks like. There are really lots of ways to do this. So for the first one, maybe you have a kid who's really into dinosaurs, and when all 5 dinosaurs get put on the token system, then they get a break, right? You might use it during work. So let's just get 5 dinosaurs done, and then you get a break. And maybe you give a dinosaur for every correct response or for every 3 correct responses. Just kind of depends on how long your kid can hang in there before they get that dinosaur. The pennies are kind of the same thing, right? Those pennies have Velcro on them, and you get a penny every time you maybe do a chore or you do a step in your routine. The bottom left here are the rules at school. So here, the kid gets to color in a face every time the teacher catches them following the rules. As long as they're following the rules, the teacher is going to swing by every once in a while and say, "Color in a face, you're doing a great job following the rules." And there's a little picture for what they're working for. And then the bottom right is something that I think a lot of families use at home, kind of like a chore chart. So, maybe the first chore is cleaning the counters. And so every time they clean the counters, they get a little smiley face. Um, the next one is sweeping the floors, right? Then they get those smiley faces. And maybe when they get like 10 smiley faces, then they get to go out for a game night. One of the downfalls of these systems, the biggest downfalls I see, is that if kids have to wait too long to access whatever the thing is that they're working for, sometimes they lose interest or you lose buy-in. So it's better at first to reward them often, frequently. And for little kids, sometimes it's like a midday check-in where they get to earn something and then they're working for something in the evening, right? For slightly older kids, maybe they can make it through the day. Most of my elementary school kids can kind of make it through the end of the day before they do an exchange for whatever it is they're working for. Some later elementary kids can wait maybe even the week if they've got really good like delayed gratification. But you've got to know your kid. And if it seems like the system like this isn't working, it's either that they're not getting tokens frequently enough or that the tokens aren't leading to the big grand prize soon enough. So just keep those things in mind. These systems are really effective as long as you've hit the sweet spot with them. And sometimes it takes some playing around with it to kind of, typically for us as parents to get in the habit of doing it and doing it consistently so that they really can trust the system and buy in to, if I invest my work in this, I will get some rewards out of this, right? So that's all the info I have for you tonight. If you have any questions or thoughts about this or specific situations that you'd like to talk through, you have my info here. I'd be happy to, have an email dialogue with you or try to schedule a Zoom consult, something like that. But I wish you luck, and I hope that your family is staying safe and staying healthy and that you're all taking care.